All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Tuesday, January 18th of 2022, ripping right along with the week so far here. Bit of a strange day in the DFS streets, just two games on the NBA side. I know we've got an 8-game hockey slate. Definitely some of the best hockey contest sizing that I've seen here, at least on DraftKings so far this season. There are a couple contests sitting out there on the NHL side that have piqued my interest here. Haven't totally decided if I want to dive in there or maybe just end up having a night not so much off. I'm playing this NBA 2-game slate and both showdowns, to be completely honest, but definitely a little bit more of a relaxing night than what it looks like it's going to be tomorrow here with a 8-game slate or whatever we have going on for NBA. But a slower day for DFS, we'll just say that. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. Of course, whether you watch this show live here or watch this back as a recording afterwards, always appreciate you guys. This is a live open Q&A style show here. I get questions in through YouTube chat, through support, through the Office Hours channel in Slack here, and answer these questions in roughly the order that they come in. So we'll just go ahead and dive right in. Not a ton of questions here for today's stream. I see we are slowly trickling up that stream view count here. Had a few issues with YouTube here earlier this morning, so I wasn't able to get the link posted on YouTube here until about an hour before the stream, and then wasn't actually able to get the stream link set up. Anyway, doesn't really matter here. Looks like we're slowly getting a few people trickling in here now. So welcome everybody. We'll go ahead. Let's just get started. Enough chatting here. Let's go ahead and get started and start answering some questions here. I'm just going to pick up exactly where we left off. It looks like Patrick had a question that came in right towards the end of the stream yesterday here. And this is about the size of your player pool. So we'll just pick this question up and start diving in here. So Patrick said, beneficial to have a feature that shows the count of players in your player pool. For NBA, I often like to keep my pool under 35. So there isn't a way to do that on step one. And we're actually aware of this. This came up recently for another user had a question, and we realized that there's not really any way you can see how many players are included in your pool in step one. What you can do, though, and I think it's probably just as effective ultimately here, is you can see how many players are in your player pool on step 3. So let's go ahead and get a build going here and maybe get a little bit of an idea of how this 2-game slate is looking here anyway. And we'll go from there. Okay, cool. So you do get your player pool right here. 26 players in the pool for this particular slate. And I actually think this can be kind of useful. A lot of times, when I'm trying to figure out the impact that sim variance is having on my builds and the number of different players I would have in my pool if I was playing a 150 max versus a 20 max, you can kind of actually run consecutive builds and see that you have certain players in your pool, a certain number of players in your pool here. If you wanted to limit that, so if you wanted to say, for example, I only want 20 maximum players in my pool tonight, but I'm relatively indifferent on which 20 those are, I think one easy way to do that is to just start unchecking players off the bottom here. And you'll find that this will allow you to get close. Sometimes there's a little bit of resistance where you start removing players and it adds one back in, but you can typically just get all the way to like a 20-player pool right here on step 3, just doing something like that. And that works pretty good. So anyway, but hopefully that helps. Let me know if there's any other questions there. And I know it is a little bit strange that we don't have that on step 1. I think that's a bit of an oversight. Probably something will get added in a future update here. I think it'd be pretty easy to just say, like, same way we presented on step 3, all, and say, however many players are in the pool tonight. Probably not very many, 50 something. So, but let's keep it going. A couple questions from Reed. Let's see here. All right, 2 questions. We'll answer them both. Is there a filter for 2 kickers on NFL showdowns? Can I have 2 kickers or 2 defense? And then second, how do you fill NBA lineups randomly? Can't figure that one out. Thanks. All right, let's talk about this. So first one, let's do football first. There isn't a filter to say no 2 kickers from no 2 kickers in the same lineup. Let's go ahead and back this up. We don't have projections yet up for the divisional round. So let's do the Cardinals Rams. So no way to set a rule for this beforehand. The easiest thing to do would be to just kind of spot check at the end. So we can build this here and use the filters to show me the lineups that have both kickers, basically, and just verify quickly that you don't have any of those. Same thing with the defenses. And I don't think you'll see this very often, to be honest, because the kickers and defenses, I think, are a little bit overplayed in showdowns to begin with. The builder doesn't really like using them as much as the field does anyway. But let's go ahead and just do this real quick. Kicker and so the other kicker's not even showing up. But if you were, we could quickly just kind of go over to the lineup and uncheck it and make sure that lineup gets removed. We can do the same thing with defense. I suspect we won't have them showing up together here. Oh, we don't even have any of the defenses in this particular game. So the last point I'll make here, and I know many of you already know this. It is probably a bit annoying hearing this over and over again, but I will say this because I think it's important. If you are getting a lineup construction with both kickers in it or both defenses in it, it is not by pure luck that construction is showing up. They are not just because they fit on a point per dollar level, on a salary level into the lineup. There's a simulation represented by that particular lineup or a set of simulations. So the builder is indicating to you that not only, really, actually, let me even be more specific, not only is that one of 500 different simulations we have for the game, but it's in fact, at least according to SaberSim here, one of the top 20 most profitable simulations that you can take advantage of on that particular slate. So this is one thing where you're definitely capable of adding value to this thing. Oh, something's in my eye here. But to just remember that, the rules of thumb that you might be familiar with from other builders don't necessarily need to apply in the same way here because of the fact that these lineups are represented by simulations. So anyway, simulation rant over. Let's move on to the next question. How do you fill NBA lineups randomly? In this case, you would just want to use your unique fill. So one thing here with so let's pull this up here. So I have, I think 40 or let's get my entry file in here. I think I have 40 or 60 entries reserved for tonight. Let's see. Okay, I have 40 entries reserved for tonight so far. So if I want to randomly fill, right, from my top 40 lineups, the easiest thing I can do here is go in, click 40, or change the lineups to 40, right? So now we have a set of 40 lineups in a pool. Let's reset the exposures here too, real quick. So we reset the exposures. We have 40 lineups. Let's click save, right? So this is our 40. So if we wanted to go in here, we can use the unique fill and get a random lineup from our top 40 into all 20 or all 40 of our entries, right? And let's actually go ahead so that I don't end up missing lock or doing something silly tonight. Let's just get them in. It's always good practice. Whenever I have an opportunity to get dummy lineups in and my reserved entries out on stream, I always take advantage of it. One thing that does come up, like let's say, and I wouldn't recommend this necessarily, but I have seen this question before where people say, no, I actually want to randomize from my top 100, right? I just because I've seen this question before, I probably wouldn't recommend doing this, to be completely honest. But I do see, like, this question has come in, like if I want to randomize for my top 100, I want a random 40 for my top 100. If you click 100 and save it like that, and then do exactly what we just did again, you will get a random 40 from your top 100. And your number one lineup, for example, might not even get filled into a lineup. So I think I guess maybe the reason for doing something like that would be if you were a little bit more, I don't even actually really know what the reason of doing that would be. Maybe if you were a little bit Saber score averse potentially, but then your exposures don't even really mean anything to you. So I wouldn't feels like a little bit of a silly thing to have demoed now. I would never do this personally, but people have asked me how to do it. So that's how you do it if you want to. But let's move on. So, okay. I see some questions coming in the YouTube chat. I promise we'll get to everything here. I'm just going to get to the questions that came in before the start of the stream. And let's see. Okay, this one must have come in the wrong way. All right, let's piece this one together here. If I change a game prediction, let's say I bump the Lakers up 5 points and news comes out that changes the original SaberSim projection, like LeBron is out, how can I see if it changed original score prediction? Or how can I see if it changed the original score prediction without resetting all the other games? I love the idea of changing game versus the player, but every time major news comes out, I have no idea what to do. Please help. I see the original player prediction, but there seems to be no way to just reset a specific game prediction back to normal. There is. Let's show how to do it. So let's say that you are maybe a little bit bullish on the Knicks, right? You think that the Knicks have a good shot to keep this game a little bit closer, and maybe the game likely to go a little bit over the total, right? And we are bearish on the Pistons. We think the Pistons are going to just get legitimately blown out and the game's going under. Something like this. So we've made adjustments to 2 different games, right? So this reset games button is going to reset all the games, right? So that will change everything back. If you just click just this button here, just this reset, it will reset only that game back to what its like proper total is, and then ask you if you want to apply changes. So if we do that, we can just one game at a time reset things back to the way they were. So that is the way you would do that for just a singular game. So let me know if that helps. And then let's see. So Alessandro, we were talking about this a lot yesterday here. And let's see. Let me just read this out. He said, follow up to an issue on the iPhone issue from yesterday's office hours, having same issue. Uploading CSV is easy, but using entry editor get the same black screen. I don't know what's going on here. I think it's an iPhone thing. I don't think it's a SaberSim thing. So I maybe will just go annoy Ross, who I know has an iPhone, because I don't have one, and maybe see if he knows how to recreate this and how to resolve it. I don't think this is a SaberSim thing. I think it's something that like maybe my best guess is that there's the phone is in like dark mode or a dark theme, and then you're downloading the file and it's opening the entry file instead of downloading it. So maybe you can just press like a download button or something. I don't know. Again, I don't have an iPhone. So I will try to find bug somebody that does here at SaberSim and see if they know how to resolve this. But I don't know, to be completely honest at the moment. So I'll see if we can figure out what's going on here, and maybe try to provide some support. But cool. All right, let's keep it going. All right, some questions from Craig here. Will there ever be a way to click on a player's name and see his game log? I'm not a game log watcher, but I do sometimes like to see how many minutes a certain player has played over the past week, or how many shots a guy's putting up on average over the past week. It's not something we really have firmly in the roadmap. I know there's a lot of other sites that do this. I think one of the problems with this is that there are so many sites that do this well, that do this very well, that being competitive on kind of having a better game log or a better site for just raw sports statistics is tough. It's tough for us to be kind of competitive in that space. One thing we have talked a little bit about here would be kind of spinning up a supporting data site of our own, since we have a lot of this data available to us, and putting up some of this stuff like elsewhere, kind of on a different site that would be a little bit easier to just maintain and manage. These are all things we've just kind of talked about. We've tossed the ideas around. I wouldn't say this is something that we are like firmly in our roadmap, because there are just bigger, I think, DFS process features that we want to deliver that we think would have a bigger impact first. Things like improving late swap, adding more control to step 3 to be able to control which lineups you're getting in your builds, grouping, more robust player rules and things like that. So it's possible. It's been discussed at the very least, but I wouldn't say this is something that is even like a lock into our roadmap for 2022. Once we get maybe what we've kind of defined and set forward as our goals for this year done, I think it's something we could consider after that. But again, even Basketball Reference, right, has just like, in terms of ease of use and the immense amount of data that is available there, it just makes it, I think, difficult to be competitive there in that space. But and then, okay, Craig said, second question, under the rules tab, when using at least X players, you can specify which teams you'd like to apply this rule to. But when you change the no more than X players, the teams you would like to apply the rule to disappears. I just found out yesterday you have to select the teams with the at least X players, then change the rules to the no more X players from the teams to be applied to the rule. Just curious why the teams disappear when changing the rule, and if that's in the pipeline to change. I feel like it should be easier to implement the no more than one player from Portland rule, etc. Yeah, that's a bug. it's not right. And I think this has come up before, and I was under the impression that this was in some form or another intended, but based on the fact that this workaround works, which I didn't realize actually worked. So I'll show you what the workaround is. So let's say, you wanted to make sure that you had no more than 2 players from Detroit tonight, because it's a smaller slate, right? The rule might be a little bit different. You can actually set that rule by specifying the teams here and then saying no more than 2 players from the same team here. And okay. And then that will actually create the rule here. So that will actually create that. Well, let me delete this rule, but that will actually create the rule here. No more than 2 players on the same team. So the logic is in place. It's just not, you can't edit the teams here. It's just very strange. So that's not right. So yes, I mean, it's not being worked on right this second, but I will make sure that gets in our queue to resolve because that's not right. And you are right. It should be easier to do that. So. Okay, cool. LJ, would SaberSim say their projections are better at NBA than NFL? I've been following SaberSim's lead on my builds a lot lately on both sports, and my NFL outcomes have been horrible compared to NBA. And the NFL is a much more higher variance sport. It is inherently a bit harder to project because it's event-based. The ranges of outcomes of players are much wider. There's going to be a ton more diversity in your lineups. The actual impact of projections means less in your NFL lineups than it does in NBA, right? Second, or along with that, NFL contests are so big that it does take a lot of time to realize your expected value that you have in those contests. Even if you're playing well, building good lineups, it can take a long time, much longer than even a single season of NFL, to realize your expected value. In NBA, you get to play every night. The variance of the sport is lower, and you're going to reap the benefits of being kind of right on the way you tackle the slate more quickly in NBA. So I wouldn't say that we are better at NBA than we are at NFL necessarily. In fact, I think SaberSim, the way this works in a sport where average projections are less important, correlations and variance are more important. I think those are the exact sports where SaberSim can actually excel, but I think it just takes a long time to realize your expected value in a sport like that. Really, even in any sport, right? Any DFS sport, it's going to take a lot of different slates to realize your profit, right? That said, we really put a lot of work into the NBA, and this is more of a talking about the strength of the NBA model rather than anything wrong with the NFL model. But we have really put a lot of work into the NBA model this season, and where the Sims are at now, I think is extremely dialed in. We've done some back testing and feel pretty confident that we have the best NBA projections in the industry at this particular moment. And we've committed a lot of work to getting the NBA model to where it is right now. It's our goal to be there with every sport, and we're winding down on NFL now, but here as we approach the start of next season and through the summer, we will commit the same resources to that, to trying to get the NFL model as tight to where it is. But in basketball, because of player ranges of outcomes kind of looking like this and average projections being so predictive, it's a little bit easier, I think, to get there in terms of your accuracy and to know that you're there. In football, because average projection just means less, right? Because you have this different looking outcome curve, right? You need to be more specifically correct about the way you're modeling the sport being played, right? It's an event-based sport where touchdowns are king. You need to be really dialed in, not on just your average projections. And in fact, who even cares about the average projections? You need to be really dialed in on how you're modeling the sport itself getting played and the way that the football game kind of takes place from opening kickoff to the last play of the game. And that's trickier. So I don't know. I wouldn't say NBA is better necessarily than NFL. I think NFL's higher variance, takes longer to realize your edge, is in theory a sport that SaberSim is more equipped to crush. But the NBA product, especially since the start of middle of December, has gotten a lot of love. And we've really worked hard on getting the Sims to where they're at. So I don't know. A little bit of a mixed bag there, but All right, cool. Let's keep it going. Kent, moving from NFL to NBA, I see you guys a minimum salary set at $4,700 for the NBA 20 max GPPs. This might be more of a strategy question. Is that a glitch on my end, or do we think NBA lineups leaving that much salary on the table is feasible? For a 2-game slate, we would say that it probably is. It's not that low. I think it's 49 for most like medium-sized slates, and it's 49.5 for large slates. But for smaller slates like this, right? I mean, you in some ways can just limit the lineup constructions that are available to you by pumping this minimum salary up. You're also more likely to increase the chance of being duplicated, which is a bit more of a concern in a small slate like this. But also there's viable paths to an optimal scoring lineup here that don't use all of the salary available or even leave that much salary on the table. I don't think there's anything wrong with pumping that up if you just disagree. That's why it's an option here. But that is what we believe is an appropriate way to tackle a 2-game NBA slate. And that's where I will have mine. So, but good question there. Yeah, so Ken said, oh, okay, changes based off slate size makes total sense. Yep. Yes, it does. So tomorrow's slate, I think tomorrow is like a 10 or an 11 game slate. It's at least like 8. It should be much, much higher. So. Craig said, along the same lines of LJ's question, I just started playing MLB DFS last year. I've heard a lot of people in the industry say that Derek Hardy's The Bat is by far the best projection system. How do you feel SaberSim's model stands up to The Bat? Just curious because I just started using SaberSim a little over a week ago, wondering if I need to shell out $300 for The Bat this season. I think Derek Hardy does great work. I think The Bat is a very good MLB projection system, but I think ours is better. I have a biased standpoint there. Well, I don't know why I'm switching over to baseball here. We're not going to get any projections. I have a little bit of a biased standpoint here, obviously. But I think I'll answer this question, similarly to how I've answered other questions that are kind of the same, right? Is especially when you're talking about comparing different systems to one another, right? Especially when you know that they are strong systems to begin with. Maybe you have three projection models that are all pretty good, that are all competitive with one another. What you end up with when you combine those together in the form of aggregating or even just using one with another system, what you get is this wisdom of the crowd kind of phenomenon here that brings in some of those outliers, right? Any model is going to have, certain outliers when you're projecting a game or a slate or a season. And the more models that you are pulling into there, sometimes you can sharpen up some of those outliers and clean up the edges, but you're probably not adding a ton of value to 95% of what you're actually working with there. And I think a lot of that can be spinning your wheels to, I don't know, it's almost like busy work. So I think The Bat is a good product. I would say that I think our projections are at least as good or better on the baseball side of things. SaberSim was originally built for baseball. It's been available for baseball for the longest. And again, because baseball is a perfect example where you're talking about a sport where average projections essentially mean nothing. Right? Saying Freddie Freeman is projected for 13 points is just saying that is his mathematical average of his full set of simulations. But this is actually what his range of outcomes looks like. And since we project players by looking at the full range of outcomes and simulate the games play by play, it allows us to come up with this. And I think this information is just far more powerful than any set of average projections. So, that would be my answer to that. If you ask my honest opinion about any of the main 3 sports, at the very least, I think we've got the best projections that are out there. But I'm also not going to slander another projection model that I know is good. So, Craig said, I think you said you've been playing MLB for 4 years. Do you solely use SaberSim's projections? Not exclusively throughout that entire time, but as recently as this last season, yes. I will make adjustments though. I think, again, baseball really matters so little what those average projections actually are that it's probably the sport where I'm most likely to make adjustments to projections from the standpoint of trying to get an edge based on ownership or correlation or whatever. I guess correlation is not a really good example. We don't have I guess I could just go pull up a main slate. Man, this is getting me excited for baseball. I'll tell you what. Let's see if we can just go track down a main slate. So, baseball is probably the sport that I'm the most likely to just make broad adjustments to projections purely to get an edge elsewhere on the slate, right? So here's one of my favorite things to do. I do this pretty often. There's always who's your cheap value pitcher, right? That everybody's going to play, right? So maybe this was a Charlie Morton slate, right? A common thing that I will do is I don't care about making the statement. I'm not saying I think the projection for the Cardinals is inaccurate, right? I'm not saying, no, I think they're going to score 5.5 runs, not 3.8 runs. I just want to leverage against the chalky value pitcher, right? So in that way, do I care about a projection model that modeled Morton as 1.5 points less? Or do I care about a projection model that was a little bit more comparatively high on the Cardinals? No, I'm making a play. I'm making an ownership play. I'm making a leverage play here. So I don't think it's a huge deal where your average projections start at, unless you told me you were playing baseball cash. And in that case, I would probably just say, probably stop playing baseball cash. Probably not worth your time. But as somebody that has done it for multiple seasons, I don't know. I don't think it's worth your time. So, but anyway, but all that to say, I mean, the bat is still a good product. It's something that we kind of compare some of our numbers against, along with the blitz on the NFL side. So it's a good product, but I think, I think it would probably make more sense from a process standpoint if you were a higher volume player, a higher stakes player. I think at some point it makes some sense just to include differing perspectives in your process, to kind of smooth out again some of those edges there, right? And that's probably something the more and more volume you are playing on a given night, looking at only one projection model's perspective on a slate, the kind of riskier you are getting with that particular angle of approaching a slate. And as you scaled that up, I think it would make more sense to potentially include more differing points of view into that process, just to, again, smooth out the outliers, right? But I don't think it is an immediate EV boost to use some other random projection set instead of what we have available that we put a ton of time into getting where it's at for the average player. So that's my take. But Craig said, good explanation. I think the game theory plays are much easier with so many people flocking to Coors games and chalk SP2s. Yeah, it is. And my research build strategy of running those 0-0-10 builds, it was made for baseball. That's where Max introduced this concept to me for the first time. Was via baseball, and specifically for identifying stacks to play. So it really, you can really visualize just how silly some ownership is and how meaningless average projections are, in particular with baseball. And when you get it for baseball, I think it starts to help as the way you're thinking about other sports like football, where average projections maybe are a little bit more representative of a player's chance of having success, but not so much as a sport like basketball. And this kind of spectrum of variance and distribution starts to kind of show up for you there. But Yeah, good question though. So, all right. Well, we're a half hour in, and I have no other questions in my queue here for today. I know we've got a decent little crowd here watching now, so welcome everybody that's tuning in live here. Of course, a welcome to everybody that watches this show after. We got off to a little bit of a slow start on the stream today, just because YouTube wasn't allowing me to post the stream up until about 30 minutes before we started here. So, but those are the only questions I had in my queue here for today. So we'll hang out for maybe 5 more minutes or so, a couple other minutes. If you have any other questions for me, go ahead and pop them into chat now. Either Slack or YouTube chat is fine. If not, we'll go ahead and start wrapping this up. But man, this did really make me excited for baseball season. I have my fingers tightly crossed that we get a baseball start on time. Opening day is supposed to be March 31st, which I don't remember a March opening day in a while, especially with COVID the last couple of years. I guess it's been a weird couple of years, but it seems that felt so early to me, especially maybe just because it said March 31st. That was mind-boggling to me, but that doesn't even seem that far away when I really start to think about it. So probably start kicking the dust off of the baseball sims here. I guess especially like in the next month or so, which is just super exciting. You want to talk about a sport that I think SaberSim excels at. Again, not to say anything negative about the other sports, but man, it is really impressive for baseball. And I think the things you can do quickly with the baseball product is just amazing. So, but let's see. M. Jackson said, are there any SaberSim best practices or hacks for attacking a weird NBA 2-game slate like tonight's slate? Let's see. I'll say a couple things. So let's take a look at the slate first of all. I think SaberSim is kind of well equipped to deal with these kinds of slates already here. I'm going to remove this rule for now because it's going to allow you to have sim variance as very high, right? So, let me think about this. Anytime sim variance is higher, right, you are basically putting more importance on individual game sims, which is going to create a bigger differentiation against what the average projections are, which is going to differentiate SaberSim from a traditional optimizer, right? The higher sim variance is, the more SaberSim is acting not like a traditional tool, and the lower it is, the more it is acting like a traditional tool. Well, we get a bigger differentiator. Our lineups are theoretically going to be different the higher this sim variance slider is. And that doesn't mean you can just, for any given slate, just crank sim variance up all the way to 8, 9, or 10, because that's too much variance to be successful in those contests. But on the slates and contest sizes where we get to organically have a very high sim variance slider, I always look forward to them a little bit, because I think it can just be a big differentiator for us, right? When other people are kind of treating this 2-game slate here and using average projections and trying to build lineups, they're not going to build lineups that actually have a lot of equity in winning that particular contest. I also think this is a good slate where, if you like the idea of doing, this is again just my take, if you like the idea of doing a research build, right, and just kind of exploring where is ownership inefficient, this is a good slate to do it, right? Talking about a build like this. And the reason why it's a good slate to do it is because we only have one late swap opportunity, right? And variance is already organically going to be very high. So I think if you want to make an ownership play or find a leverage spot on the slate, I think running a research build on this particular slate can be a good opportunity to do that. I would probably say, broadly speaking, I think there's probably not going to be an enormous edge that you're going to get from late swapping to begin with on this particular slate. So I think we're going to kind of have to hope that ownership is inefficient somewhere. What I would probably do, I think the way that I would approach this is either by doing your own independent research, by running a research build, or by doing something by looking at like percentiles against ownership. I would probably look for maybe a few higher upside plays relative to their salary that you were taking a significant stand on. At this particular point of the day, this stands out to me, right? If Towns is actually going to be 17% owned, and that's where it seems like he's going to go, and the industry is kind of projecting him like this, if like even Anthony Edwards, right? If we're getting this low ownership on some of the Wolves, right, at relatively similar capped or at relatively similar ceiling projections, I'll probably just be well over on those guys and maybe even take total stands on some of the other plays on the slate. But yeah, some of my traditional edges that I like to rely on for NBA DFS are not going to be there tonight, right? We have one late swap opportunity and not a lot of big pending news. So, and also on these particular slates, the field actually does a lot better of a job reacting to news. So even if something broke, the ownership of the value plays that open up a lot of times are a little bit more efficient. So I would look for a situation where because of an average projection, a player looks like they're going to be, or because of the ownership projection, it looks like a player is going to be a little bit lower owned relative to their ceiling projection and make a stand. I think that's probably one of the bigger edges you can get. So, but Towns, I mean, a lot of this Timberwolves ownership just looks like silly low to me at the moment. So that would probably be my approach, but D Baker says, would you recommend late swapping before each start game time? For example, 4:30, 5:37. I think it's just lately it's just been easier for me to just do it and just say, if there's going to be Sims run, I'm just going to run the late swap and just update. I've answered this question before and talked about how one of the tools that I like to use is, what's going on here? Basketball. I like to use Basketball Monsters news dashboard. And what I'll do is I'll check to see if Sims have run in our Slack channel, and then I'll compare those Sims against what Basketball Monster says is the latest news and kind of try to piece together, like, was there a starting lineup that came out that was different than expected? Was there a player that got ruled out? Was there some kind of news that made that Sim run? If there wasn't any news on the Basketball Monster dashboard, sometimes I'll just leave it alone and just kind of assume that whatever Sim actually ran on the SaberSim side was just minor, just like a minor minute tweak, maybe 1 minute in one direction for another player or a player or another, right? But that is tedious enough that at least for the past week or so, I've just been late swapping every single time a Sim runs. And so essentially I've been late swapping before the start of every game because I think it's just easier. I'm willing to embrace a little bit of additional variance by doing that. And I think it's just easier to just say, hey, there's a game at, we'll build lineups at lock. Then 30 minutes later, there's 3 games that start. So we'll swap. Then 30 minutes later, there's 2 games that start. So then we'll swap and then just do all the swaps. And I think it's easier than actually having to make a decision on each time I'm swapping by looking at some other source. So short answer, yes, I would. And I have been doing that. So question from Kirit here. Are player hot and cold streaks taken into account in the Sims? This is an interesting one. The idea, I think, that a player is going to perform better if they are already doing well in a game is pretty well debunked. I think there's an interesting thread of research about that out there. If you want to go research it, I can't remember the name of the folks that did this, but there were these maybe they're mathematicians or statisticians, I'm not sure, but they built something similar probably to SaberSim and basically created an NBA simulator and actually wrote hot streaks into the simulation and then compared it to a version of the simulation that didn't include hot streaks and found that the model that didn't include hot streaks mimicked real life more accurately than the model that did include hot streaks, right? I know there's a lot of anecdotal player data out there that says, yes, no, you definitely play better when you're running hot, but I don't think the actual the analytical data that's out there seems to support that. However, one thing that we've talked about here before that we don't currently model very well is how likely a player is not necessarily to perform better, to score more fantasy points when they're already doing well, but how it impacts the way a game is played when a player is doing well. And Matt actually talked about this recently. We had, after Jamar Chase's week 17 or week 16 50-point outburst, right? There was a question that came in and basically someone had noted that we had essentially our simulations described Jamar Chase's 50-point performance as something like a 1 in 10,000 chance of happening, right? I think there was actually one sim in our 10,000 of the game that actually occurred. And what Matt brought up is a potential weak spot or a blind spot in the simulations. And I think he's right. I think this is an interesting way for us to go forward, is the idea that Joe Burrow started feeding Chase the ball more when he was going off, right? So his rates of his target rate, his target share, his snap share, right? Maybe even his I guess those two in particular, those went up once he was already performing well in the game. And that's not something that the simulator takes into account at the moment. The basketball analogy would be, Steph Curry's not more likely, statistically speaking, to make a three-pointer if he has made 3 threes before that, right? However, he probably is quite a bit more likely to attempt a 3 at that point. And we've talked about this a little bit, and I might be wrong. Maybe on the basketball side, this is something that is built into the Sims a little bit more than I'm aware of at the moment. I know it's not on the football side, but that is a direction I think we want to go down a little bit more. Is not so much, Steph Curry's raw probability of making a basket is higher if he's made one recently, because it isn't. But I think, his chance of shooting that shot is probably higher if he's scored a certain amount or is shooting a certain percentage already in the game. So I think that's interesting, but that's kind of where we are at with that particular that particular question, the hot and cold streaks thing. And I should know, maybe I'll see if I can dig up who these guys are that did that particular study. I don't want to go down a Google hunt on stream here at the moment, but I'll pull where I read that and see if I can maybe pop that into the Office Hours channel in Slack. But Slim Shady, I did answer this question yesterday, but we have time, so I'll answer it today. You said you might have answered yesterday. Why am I only getting Saber scores of 100 and under? I see guys get scores of over 100 frequently. So Saber score is standardized to 100. So it is on a scale where 100 is the maximum Saber score. The number one lineup from any given build is always 100. So if you're seeing a score with a higher, if you're seeing a Saber score with a high, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. If you are seeing a lineup in any of our content that has a Saber score of over 100, it's probably an older video. This has not always been the case. Our old content has lineups with Saber scores of above 100 because for a while you could get Saber scores that were over 100. And we standardized it to 100 because I think the idea of trying to maximize Saber score between builds is not the way you want to approach the process anyway. It was just confusing people. So this is a change that took place, I think, probably about a year ago. So if you watch videos older than a year, you might see that. But Saber score is not, one other thing I'm thinking here, Saber score is not projected score, right? So yes, lineups can score far more than 100 points. Saber score is not projection. It's kind of a calculation determined that kind of compares lineups to one another to figure out which lineup is the highest expected value. So Kirit said, meant more like game to game, like earlier in the season, Jokic was putting up 70 DK points, which made him a must play every slate almost. So again, this is kind of complicated. So we will consider more recent information about the way a particular team or player is playing more strongly than older information, but neither is taken just in a vacuum. So let's say Jokic is crushing it and killing it every single game, and his rate of getting rebounds and his rate of getting assists are up, and his turnover rate is down, and maybe he's playing a little bit more minutes, right? We will be taking those things into account in the simulations, and he is likely to project better than if he had not recently had good games. But it is not as if we are just bumping a player's projection recently because that player is hot. And there's a balance there, right? Like if Steph Curry goes on a run, right? There's a difference of what might be going on there. If he's shooting 80% from the field in his last 3 games, right? We aren't going to assume that Steph Curry's new normal is shooting 80% from the field. And we're actually probably likely to under project him relative to what his salary is on that slate, because there isn't really something that gives us an indication that the Warriors are playing differently or Steph Curry is playing differently such a way that you can predict that he will stay that hot. But let's say Wiggins gets hurt or Jordan Poole gets hurt, and all of a sudden Curry's shooting 20% more times a game, right? There is a level of predictability there that we could probably say, Steph Curry's likely to probably score more because he's going to shoot more or because he's going to be on the court more. So there's kind of a balance there of yes, hot streaks or players scoring well over the course of a few games might be indicative of that player now just kind of operates at a higher tier of fantasy point production, but it also might be that they're just kind of randomly running hot. I know Lauri Markkanen is a very common SaberSim player that shows up in a lot of lineups, even when he's not performing well, right? Throughout this middle part of the season where there was, I think, a couple week period where everybody was getting a ton of Lauri Markkanen, right? He was shooting incredibly cold, right? Well, but he wasn't shooting cold in a way that was predictively bad, right? He wasn't performing in a way that was predictively bad. He wasn't taking less shots. He wasn't getting less minutes. His rates weren't going down. He was just running incredibly cold shooting the ball. So his salary dropped lower and lower and lower as his fantasy point production went down. And that made SaberSim want to play him more and more and more because he was actually inefficient relative to his salary, right? I think there was a moment with Cade Cunningham earlier this season too, where he was that guy, where, he was just shooting the ball awful to start the season. And it was impossible really that his rates, his field goal percentage would continue to be that bad, but he was taking the same amount of shots, getting the same baskets. So in that way, we're not going to say, oh, he's cold right now, he can't shoot, drop his production. But if he stopped playing as many minutes, then we would. And it's very similar with baseball too, right? Baseball is a very good example of it, where, a player, a hitter in baseball is virtually never going to predictively get more opportunities to hit the ball. They're not going to get more at bats than they would normally, right? Like theoretically, if a bench player in basketball starts playing really good ball, the coach might pump them into the starting lineup or start giving them 30 minutes instead of 24 minutes or something like that, right? Which is going to give them a greater opportunity to produce. In baseball, that doesn't happen. You're getting your 4 to 5 at-bats pretty much every single game, unless there's an outlier performance in the game where you score 12 runs and everybody gets to bat 6 times, something like that, right? But just because a player is batting hot doesn't mean that they're going to get more opportunities, which means hot streaks in baseball are typically probably one of the things that the field overrates most significantly and is virtually never going to show up in the sim, right? Again, there are intricacies to that, right? And maybe a batter has made a significant change to their process and they are more disciplined at the plate, right? Well, maybe their walk rate has gone up as a result of that. And when we simulate the game with a batter's higher walk rate, we can pick that up, right? And that would actually shine through. It's not that, I don't know. It's not that Aaron Judge is hot at the plate. It's actually that he made a change. He's seeing the ball better. He's walking more. He's swinging at balls less. And now he's become a better hitter, right? That's not so much of a hot streak. That's something that'll show up in the Sims. But if Nolan Arenado is, 12 for 17 in his last at-bats with 5 home runs, with no underlying metric of what he's actually done to improve himself as a hitter during that time, it's likely that he's just hot. And all that levels out over the course of the season. And it doesn't make sense that his projection is 150% higher in his next game because he's hit the ball well in June. But you'll hear stuff like that. And people will play lineups to capitalize on hot streaks. And I think it's an edge. I think it's an advantage because that stuff doesn't really exist there. So anyway, cool. Let's keep it going. Ooh, that was a fun one. I got on a little bit of a tear there. Craig said, depends on the slate. I usually view Jokic as a near must play. His ceiling is just as high or higher than most players on a given slate. He also has a much higher floor because he gets double-doubles and triple-doubles so much more often. The Nuggets run through Jokic. He also seems lower owned than LeBron's and Harden's, which usually makes him a better play, in my opinion. Yeah, Jokic. Okay, so now this is more on the narrative side. Jokic gets a lot of, I don't want to say hate, right? MVP last year. But I think maybe it's just because of the way that he appears on the court that people don't play him like he is who he is on the court, that what his ceiling really is. And I think it's a little bit better at higher stakes outside of the lower stakes, medium stakes contests. But I think there is definitely a little bit of a bias that maybe the more casual NBA fan or the more casual NBA DFS fan doesn't actually realize just how good he is. But anyway, Roy says, does entering our own custom projections into SaberSim negate the work that the sim already put in? It does not. This is probably the second most common question I get. I will explain what it does. So let's say Stephen Curry, you've put a custom projection 44.6 in here. We've lowered his projection by 1 point. What is going to happen here is we are going to take every single sim that Steph Curry is in for tonight's slate, every single Warriors sim, and in every single one, we are going to lower his output that he scored in that game by 1 point. So in the rare game where he scores 25 points, now it's 24. In the rare game where he scores 71, now it's 70, right? So you still get the full range of outcomes. You still get the value of all the sims, but we've just lowered them all by the 1 point fantasy point difference that you've changed its custom projection to. So Sheets says, I'll throw this question in if you have time. If you save a dummy lineup in 20 contests, can the entry editor replace it with 20 new ones? I can't get it to do it. The easiest way to do that, so you can't do that with the late swap tool. So if you just have one dummy lineup in all of your entries and you try to late swap, it's going to say, we're only picking up one lineup, so we'll only late swap it once. So the easiest thing to do here is to run a fresh build and replace it with unique lineups. So let's say, let me demo this here real quick. Okay, so these are my entry files from the start of the day here, where I just had a dummy, basically just a reserved, right? So there's no lineup into any of these contests. If we go here and say late swap, it's going to say, great, let's do it. One lineup, right? Well, that's not super helpful. That doesn't give you unique lineups. So in this case, what I would do is go and actually do a build your lineups here. In this case, I want 40 unique lineups, just for example. And then I can fill these in with the entry editor. So here we'll finish this here. So 40 lineups. Let's just go ahead. And now fill, and we'll do a unique fill. And now one thing, I think another common thing that comes up, and actually, you know what? I don't know if by chance, if Baron is watching this, but Baron, if you are, give me a shout. So one thing that you'll notice is if you go in here now, so you filled these, right? But now if you go in and hit late swap, right, it's still going to say one lineup here, right? What you have to do is you have to actually download this here, right? We kind of count this as actually being used, right? These files, this entry has actually been uploaded once you click download. So once you click download, and uploading to DraftKings is less important, but once you actually click download, that's when we're like, okay, this guy's actually using these lineups. These are the lineups that are entered, and now this is 40. So let me know if that helps. I think that is what you're asking here. Yeah, cool. She says, yes, that's what I do. Excellent. Have some more entry editor late swap questions for next time. Yeah, let me know. And feel free, if you want to pop them into the Office Hours channel in Slack, and I'll get to them right at the start of tomorrow's stream. So, cool. Crypto Artist says, how do I delete a player from the pool before running lineups? You can just uncheck them. So here in step 1, let's say you want no Curry tonight for whatever reason, uncheck. He's removed, won't show up in your lineup. So pretty straightforward there. You can do that on step 3 too. One of the cool things, I might as well show this since it's very unique about SaberSim. You don't have to do this all in step 3 or you don't have to do it all in step 1. You don't have to get everything where you want it before you build. Let's say you build your lineups and you wanted to see, how much Curry was I getting? And you say, oh, well, I'm getting 60% Curry. Maybe I'm actually going to leave him in my pool instead. But I'm going to take out, Klay Thompson, right? He's still not playing a lot of minutes. I'm only getting 15% anyway. I'm going to take him out. Now Klay Thompson's gone. We sort through your pool of 500 and find 40 lineups that don't include Klay Thompson. So you can do it in either spot. LJ says, I've noticed updates prior to NFL games have been around 1 hour to 50 minutes before kickoff. Any suggestions on building lineups without having to build all my lineups and comb through them in an hour? No, to be completely honest. So our final sims for NFL run 1 hour before kickoff, and they take about 10 minutes to run. So that's what you're seeing there. I would say I would try to do most of your DFS work for NFL after those final sims have run. I think you can research the slate beforehand and maybe come up with maybe some general themes of who you think is going to be over-owned, who you think is going to be under-owned, what are going to be the low-owned, high-upside stacks, right? I think that's fine, but your final lineup building portion should probably only take place after the final sims have run because there's so much valuable information in there. Those final sims have the inactives, right, which is probably the biggest part. But it also just kind of has the final combination of all the information we have about the game into those sims. I would say if you were like, look, I don't have, in the 50 minutes the sim is giving me to build all my lineups, I don't have time, I'd probably scale back a little bit. If you're playing multiple sites, play one. If you're playing 400 lineups, play 150. If you're playing 150 lineups, play 20 until you get the process down of doing it quickly in that kind of last hour you have before lock. But whatever value you get out of getting that up-to-date information is going to be much more valuable than starting 2 hours before and doing that without. I mean, I know people that build their NFL lineups before inactives have come out and then just tweak based on inactives. And I don't get how you do that, frankly. I don't understand. Like I don't know how you build meaningful lineups without knowing who's playing the game. So that's my personal take. But so anyway, Slim Shady says, I'm mainly a single entry player and I run 150 out of 1,000 lineups, then choose from the top 5 or so. Or should I just be running one lineup? It doesn't matter, really. It's up to you. Okay, well, I'll say this. So let me clarify. If you said you were doing this, right? Wait, 1,000. Right? So you're saying you're doing something like this. What number is in this field is meaningless. This doesn't mean anything. All this number controls is how many lineups we show you to start on step 3. So it doesn't really make any difference what number is there, right? So all that number controls is what number is up here, right? And you can just as easily change it here. So let's say you built one but wanted to see instead what the top 10 were. Great. Now this number does have an impact. This number controls how many lineups, how many raw lineups we're actually building for you to poke through. If you're just a single lineup player, if you're literally just playing a single lineup every night, I think this number is a little bit less important. I think if you're running it at 1,000, I think 1,000's fine. I think 500 would probably also be plenty. I don't think you necessarily need to build 999 additional lineups to pick just one. But leaving it at 500 is nice. The main thing that this lets you do, obviously, it lets you choose. It gives you a lot of different options to choose your lineup. But it also gives us more shots at figuring out what the best lineups are. So if you said, imagine if we built 20 lineups and then said, what are the best 10? Well, those would only be the best top half of that set of 20. But when you build 1,000 lineups and choose the top 10, right? That's the top 1%. That's like the elite set of lineups from that broader set. So the more lineups you can build lets us figure out what the best lineups are a little more accurately. I don't think you necessarily need 1,000 here. If you've liked it, I think that's probably maybe a little bit overkill. The default settings, I think, are perfect, right? So my single entry process, when I'm only playing a single lineup, typically looks something like this. I'll pick the sliders that match the contest I'm playing. And I like to put this at like 10, just as a starting point. Let pool size be 500 and see what the first 10 single entry lineups look like. That's my approach. So. And then Sheet says, okay, I'll fire one follow-up. In the late swap tool, I don't think you can uncheck a player after the rebuild, or can you? You can't. After the lineups have been rebuilt with the late swapper, you can't make any changes. You have to do that before the build. But you can do it here. You can do it here. So before you've late swapped, right? Let's say something weird comes out. Steve Kerr comes out and says that Curry's a little sore and he's going to play limited minutes, right? Some weird NBA vague coach news, right? And you're just like, you know what? I'm not interested. I'm out, right? I mean, the Sims are obviously going to run and Steph Curry's projection is going to go down and whatever, but maybe you're just like, no, I'm out. I'm not playing Curry. In this case, you could swap here, uncheck him here and run the late swap and then do this. And then build like that. But once this build is done, once we actually run this, you can't make any changes because there's nothing to change, right? So, and what that number is, while you saw that there, 52, right? What's actually happening there is we are rebuilding. Basically, we had to rebuild the 40 lineups 52 times to get 40 of them that don't have Curry in it. I know that's a common question too. Hey, why did it say rebuilding 52 why did it say rebuilding 52 instead of 40? Well, I had to actually rebuild 12 of them, presumably twice, or 6 of, I don't know. My brain's a little fried. I think 12 of them twice to find no Curry lineups. But now we have no Curry. But now if we went in here and said, I don't want any Cade Cunningham, right? Or like if you started editing projections, nothing's going to happen here because pool size is 40, lineups is 40. You can't do anything. So, yep, you got it. It is building exactly the amount of lineups you need rather than a pool of XXX to choose from like the normal build. So, yeah, and that's something we're actually planning on changing. What we want this to actually be a usable. I mean, how cool would it be is if you do a late swap and you have all the ability that you have before a build after. I'm just getting excited just thinking about that. Or even better yet, you give the builder multiple shots at it, right? Let the builder try to rebuild each lineup 10 times and figure out what the best version of it is, just like we do before the build. That is coming. That is something that one is firmly in the roadmap. We definitely want to deliver that. I think that'll make a big difference. So I'm super excited about that. In the meantime, I think you were probably just by late swapping alone, but then also late swapping with a tool like SaberSim that understands ownership and correlation and the ranges of outcomes of players is a huge edge. But having the ability to do the same things you can do before the build as a late swap would just be amazing. So looking forward to that. But all right. Looks like Reed posted a momentum hot streaks kind of article here in the Office Hours channel. So that might be the same one I'm thinking of. Might be a different. I know it's something that's been studied a lot, just because I think it's particularly interesting, right? Especially because players are so vocal that it does, right? You know, and that's, I get it, right? Like if you've played sports even recreationally, right? Like you can feel like you have that hot hand, like you can't miss. But the reality, you know, the statistical reality is that it doesn't really predict if that next shot is going in. But anyway, you guys managed to get us through to the hour here. So thanks everybody that kind of helped fill in the second half of the show and get us to the end. Slim Shady, how do I get into Slack? There's a link to join in the description of every past Office Hours video on YouTube. So once this video is processed and put up, it will be there. But yesterday's Office Hours video already has it there. So there's a link to join. Definitely recommend joining up. It is a really great community. Anyway, we'll go ahead and leave it there. We will be right back here again tomorrow. Same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern for another day of Office Hours with, frankly, a much more exciting looking NBA slate in front of us tomorrow. In the meantime, good luck with your lineups tonight, whether you're playing this 2-gamer or playing some of these showdowns, or maybe you are playing the 8-game hockey slate. Good luck in all of your DFS, and I will see you all tomorrow. So until then, take care. See ya.